Hello, everyone. So we're just going to give it a couple more minutes for everyone to filter in, but I can see we've got some people joining us. Apologies, we are a minute or so late starting. Paul, I don't know if you can, and John, just go on mute because I can hear some shuffling of papers and things like that. Yeah, there we go. That's much better. Cool. Well, while last people filter in, we will just get going. Well, I guess start off for people in the chat. Feel free, by the way, as you go, because this is kind of niche topic focused just on HR tech. We've not got a kind of huge room full of people, so do ask questions. We're happy to make this pretty interactive. And towards the end, Paul and I are just going to kind of chat about the implications, how we can act on all of this, on all of what we've found. So do feel free to chime in and kind of guide us a little bit on how we can make this useful for everyone who's on here. I guess by way of introductions first, so I'll introduce myself and then I'll let Paul introduce himself. So I'm Tom, I'm the founder of Demand Genius. We've also got John with us from Demand Genius who will help just interrupt me when I'm blabbing on too much and need to go and answer a question or just slow the hell down. Demand Genius, we're AI startup. We help B2B brands specifically transition from a kind of search-led world to an AI-led world, and that's what kind of brings us into doing studies like this. So we do three things really as a company. We do research, we build technology, and we help people apply it. So this is, I guess, a little bit of two of those. Paul, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Paul David, founder and CEO of Literal Humans. We are a growth partner for tech for good startups, and we also work with charities, helping them with go-to-market, RevOps, and creative.
Cool. So just to cover a little bit of what we're going to do today. So I'm going to take you through the research that we've done. I'm going to try not to kind of drown you in that. We'll share the report afterwards, so we won't go through literally every chart, but the key insights and also just how we went about it. And then we're going to go through a little bit of like specifically what we found relative to content strategies, how different HR tech brands that we studied and the industry as a whole is approaching content, and then what that means for what you should be doing as we move into the AI era and the requirements change a little bit. There's some stuff that's the same, there's some stuff that's different. One of the things that is the same is that ultimately on the other end of this is eventually going to be a human being, whether directly or indirectly. And that's where Paul comes in as the founder of Literal Humans, who were kind enough to join us in doing this study and helping us, well, conceive of all the data that we want to capture and then pick it apart from the perspective of an actual human rather than a robot. And then from there, we'll just get into some of the takeaways. As I say, feel free as we go through to chime in and ask questions. So I guess useful first is just to set the scene a little bit in terms of what we actually did. So one of the things that we do a lot at Demand Genius is using AI to analyze content. We kind of realized pretty early on that when AI can do something humans can't, which is read massive volumes of content and a way that would be unbelievably dull for any human being and make lots of little decisions to help us analyze that content. So for the purpose of this study, we want to focus that very specifically on the HR tech sector. And we wanted to look across, and we picked down a list of about 25 to 30 B2B HR tech brands, and literally read every piece of content on all of those sites over the course of about a 10-year period, which totaled to about 90,000 pieces of content. It's a pretty large spreadsheet. And what we were doing, we had loads of different AI agents, which were assessing different, very specific things across 5 key dimensions. So those are what we typically will do when we do an audit for a brand, which is we look at, I'm going to try and remember them all now, extractability, citability, differentiation, optimization, and then a fifth one that likewise has a name. And that is all composed of 20 different attributes. So there's a whole load of different things that we're assessing in order to roll up to that. And we noticed some really interesting things. So one thing that's always struck us as we do this is the potential of that to really tell a story. So because as well as just looking at the content itself and the optimization, we can look at the topics that are covered. And in HR tech, I'm not going to go into this lots because I think we want to focus on AI, but I thought this was really interesting and just plots us a bit of a story of society as a whole, which is HR tech, very regulatory focus. And then you see this dip where wellness and culture and kind of topics like that really come to the fore. and then those two gaps widen again a little bit post-COVID. And I just thought that was a really interesting chart that tells a bit of a story beyond just content marketing. I'll let you decide for yourself what that story is, because I don't want to go down that path too much. And then what we've noticed in doing that and in analyzing it across all of those different areas is probably the headline takeaway is that content marketing strategies across HR tech, and actually in a lot of other industries that we've done this in, is extremely well optimized, but very, very badly differentiated. So when we analyze all of these different attributes and we roll that up to, okay, what are the things that go into differentiation? So how much information gain can we detect in the content? Is there a clear like narrative and perspective that shines through it? That's what rolls up into differentiation. Optimization is more about the keyword, the keyword optimization, how clear the definitions are, things like that. What we noticed was consistently optimization is very, very high, differentiation a lot lower. And that's one of the things that we think is a big thing that brands need to adapt to over the course of the coming years, because it's a big requirement that is changing, right? In order for content to be useful to machines and to humans, you need to give people something that ChatGPT can't give them directly, that Claude can't give them directly, right? ChatGPT can spit out very well optimized content. It can't give them a unique perspective. It can't give them original data. And that's the biggest thing that we actually see determine success at the moment in AEO. Google released a new March core update in March. And one thing that did very explicitly was showed the importance of information gain. The Ahrefs did a study which showed that content with original research got a 22% visibility boost, and a pretty kind of similar decline for content that lacked that. So that's the kind of clearest signal of something we've been saying for a while, which is that really feeding into what content gets surfaced. So you need to be doing some form of original research program in your brand or in your business. So just to go back through, I guess, the story a little bit. So as I say, one of the things we notice most prominently about content is we're very, very efficient across the industry. And we've noticed a clear shift in the role that content plays within the overall buyer journey. So if you go back 5-6 years, you can see top of funnel is by far and away the dominant kind of content type. Middle and bottom of funnel much lower. We've seen that really flip, and a lot more bottom of funnel and particularly mid funnel content, which tends to be the sign of a mature content strategy, is that they have a well built out middle of the funnel. And it also just speaks to a slightly different role and changing business models a little bit. Content playing a much bigger role in terms of buyer enablement, helping to actually convert people, as well as just being used as a hook and a kind of awareness lever. So I found that quite interesting. The other thing that we noticed pretty clearly, though, which is maybe a little bit less positive, is just a pretty stark decline in the level of innovation that goes into formats. And you can see this dip even further around 2023, 24, when AI starts to come into the picture. What we get is a lot more homogeneity, a lot less variation, and a lot less creativity in how content is packaged up, and also in the thought and the kind of level of authority that appears to go into it. Over the course of all of the content that we studied, we found only 1.3% with any element of interactivity, which is, again, something, maybe a bit of a personal belief. That's a huge opportunity, I think, for any brand at the moment, as we're looking for ways that we can provide value through our content over and above the information that people can access elsewhere. You can do that in a few ways. You can give them completely original information, but that's still going to be something that AI is going to synthesize and surface directly for people. If you want to draw them to your website, you need to find new ways to make it engaging, to make it easier to learn from, to digest. We did something on one of our reports, which was the kind of dark AI research that we did, which was back in March, where we put all of that data into a custom GPT, and then people could go and could engage and kind of ask questions of the report. All sorts of stuff like that you can do, but I think as people get more and more comfortable with Claude Code and spinning these kinds of things up, I think that's a big opportunity for a lot of teams. And we're going to talk a lot more later about thought leadership and as we go, so I won't cover that too much now. This is the really big takeaway, or the really big thing that I think, if everyone could take one thing away from this study, it would be what we're about to show you here, which is we were looking at how optimization and differentiation compare. in content, and the kind of time trend is really interesting. So traditionally, we are pretty good at optimizing content. And this is one of the, I think there's a lot of different debates around the GEO, AEO thing, of the extent to which it is just a continuation of SEO. And I think there's certainly things that it has in common, and a lot of the like basic optimization of content from the research that we've done is pretty similar. You want it to be structured clearly, things like that. And it shows that by, let's say, 2023, as an industry, HR tech was very, very good. We produced quality content that was well optimized. It was easy to understand. It was information rich. And that then drops off pretty sharply around 2024. Differentiation is far, far lower. This chart actually covers up the extent of the fall a little bit, because it was a lot because of the scale. But if I go on to the next one, you start to see the story from this very, very clearly, which is where we look at both of those as a starting point of where differentiation and optimization were, and you see a really positive picture for optimization, and you see the extent to which, even from a pretty low starting point, content differentiation has fallen to a pretty poor state. What I found fascinating was when we went to look into that, I thought, okay, what's driven that? And I kind of noticed the timeline is pretty clearly 2024, and I'm like, oh, I wonder what people could have started doing then. And so sure enough, when you overlay that with content volume, what you see is that it coincides almost perfectly with an absolute explosion in the volume and velocity at which we're churning out content. So I think it's a pretty clear story that this is the impact that AI generated content is having. AI can produce pretty adequately optimized content, right? It's not as good as we were in 2023, but it's still solid and back where we were. Differentiation is not something that AI is able to consistently produce, really. And we'll talk a little bit later about how you can get it to support a quality content strategy. But I thought this was just fascinating. Interestingly enough, it's a very similar picture to what we've seen. We've just done a big study looking at brands that we know from case studies and things like that have very aggressively adopted AI, built on something that Lily Ray actually did, who's a kind of SEO thought leader. And what that shows is this very clear same pattern in terms of these brands' traffic. So you can often generate from AI content a very clear traffic spike, and what happens after almost universally is that it all regresses back to the mean. And I think this gives us a really good signal as to why, actually, and we're going to do a lot more looking into that for our next piece. I'm going to pause, John. I'm talking an awful lot. So I don't think we've got any questions, but is there anything that's worth going back over? Or
no questions in the chat. I think carry on.
Cool. So I guess as we get into what we actually do with this information, I think the overwhelming observation from us, and it's something that we've noticed a lot in general, everyone comes to us as a business and they ask, how do we get cited by ChatGPT? What very few people ever ask, and when I'm feeling particularly kind of cheeky and argumentative, I will just ask back, is like, why should AI cite you? And I think this shows very clearly that the majority of brands don't have a clear answer to that. We don't write content. We don't have, as a brand, a clearly defined perspective. We don't do the original research that actually produces something on our website that is eminently citable. And as I kind of went through this earlier, it's becoming very apparent that is what consistently drives results. So I think that's something I would encourage everyone to take away from this. If we look a bit more deeply at all of the different things, and these were those 5 things that I was struggling to remember earlier, that we assess content against, that we know has an impact to varying degrees on content performance and brand performance in the AI era. There is a very clear trend that we do well in things that were important in search, and we do badly in things that weren't and are now. Accuracy and currency. Generally speaking, actually, this is incredibly positive across HR tech. We've done this exercise in fintech as well. I don't know if you keep scorecards between you and fintech HR people, but if you do, then you're winning. They have a very poor kind of content maintenance habit, but that is actually really, really strong. So most content is accurate, it's current, that's clearly coming through. It's generally of a very high quality. We're looking less at like the depth of information here and just, is it clear? Is it kind of transparent? Does it read well? Is it easy to consume? Generally speaking, yes. Ooh. Need to not grab my mouse. And extractability also is very good. And again, that's something that we've been working on and honing, right? We spent 2 decades working on how we can make our content extractable. What isn't very good is citation likelihood. So there isn't something in there that an AI model or someone or a person can latch onto and say, oh, I'm going to go and talk about that. And then strategic differentiation, which is quite sad to see, actually, because I think that's something that every brand should really be making sure shines through everything they do, right? What's your unique content IP? Again, we'll talk about later how people can find that. So yeah, I don't think I want to go through this too much more because I think I'm hammering a point that we've already made here, really. But as a whole, yeah, content very readable, but not actually very easy to cite. The only thing that I think is useful that we talk about a lot, just to give you a bit of an actual framework that you can use, then this is what we do when we measure information gain. We have this 3-tiered framework where level 1 is interpretive gain. So that's a new perspective on existing knowledge, right? Now that's what, and we can talk a bit more about this later, that's what you can achieve with AI, right? If you have your market perspective, if you have a kind of SME process internally, you can use AI to kind of apply that to all the things that people already know and achieve level 1. Level 2 is empirical gain, so new research, new information. And level 3 is conceptual gain, so kind of when that leads to something really meaty, a new framework, a new way of understanding the world, or your particular corner of it. What we saw when we applied this to all of this 90,000 pieces of content is 5.7% on average scored high in information gain. So generally speaking, we're at ones and zeros. The same is true of narrative ownership, and that's looking at, there's 2 different things that go into that, but that's looking at whether there is a clear narrative or story that comes through the content versus it just being strictly informational. There's one or a couple of case studies that I then wanted to just call out of people that are doing this really well. And consistently, it comes back to them having a really clearly defined content IP. There's a decent amount of variance throughout. So I know we'll probably have some people on the webinar or watching this on the recording who were in the data set. 2 brands that did really well, Ashby and HiBob. You can see very clearly, and there's a lot more on this in the actual report, but Ashby, a lot of their content is built on proprietary recruiting data, and HiBob, it's built on a lot of named research that they do, and they clearly have a kind of quarterly cadence of producing these pieces of research. And what you just see, and this is where AI is fantastic, is you just see that kind of core context of originality flow through into absolutely everything that they do. They're still producing a pretty high volume, and that's where AI can help, but they're just doing it in a more discerning way than spitting out blog posts. So they were the two brands that stood out really in terms of kind of AI era readiness versus the mean. And that's me. I will hand over to Paul at this point to talk about actual people instead of machines. It doesn't look like we've got any questions. So Paul, I will let you go ahead.
Yes, for sure. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great. So we're going to kind of dive into what's been a sort of specialty sector of ours, and this was surprising to us. We founded Little Humans in 2020, and HR tech was kind of, taking off, in part because everyone's pushed into remote work. So all these, employee engagement, softwares and holistic kind of HRIS systems started to take root. So we got the chance to work with some incredible companies like Oyster and Remo First and Bradford Jacobs. We were customers of remote.com. So a lot of the big players, in particularly the what's called the EOR space, the employer of record space. So yeah, we'll dive in and talk about HR tech content and sort of what the data reveals.
Cool. Just tell me, by the way, Paul, when.
Oh yeah, just go ahead. And for some, the bottom right of my screen is you. So I don't know if there's a way to move the video. Maybe it's just how it's showing up for me. Sorry, because blocking a little bit of it, but all good. I'll work through it. Yeah, no worries. The view kind of from the outside in, I think we got a great sort of forensic picture of HR tech content, and it was really cool as practitioners to kind of see this. So it's been a joy working with Demand Genius in this sense. Obviously, this striking number of 97% of HR tech content being classified as functional and efficiency led. Some interesting threads there of has that shifted because of AI, and obviously this kind of content is easy to kind of churn out and use AI for. But it's ironic, isn't it? Like for, a sector that kind of has, it's all about people, let's say, so we can jump to the next one. Yeah, we can go to the next one there, Tom, if you're ready. So this category, we spent a lot of time in this, the whole value prop is people. It's about how you hire, how you retain them, how you develop them, motivate them, and, having 97% of the content, be sort of functional, only is interesting. Obviously that content's easier to produce. It's more easily optimized for search. And so obviously we've done a lot of this content, like guilty as charged. And the whole category followed us. And I remember reaching a point with some of our clients where the space just shifted, and a lot of these EOR clients in HR tech, they just weren't getting the gains that they used to from content, from paid ads, and they would come to us like, "What's going on? The spend isn't achieving the ROI that it used to," and we're like, "Yeah, well, the landscape has shifted." So what that landscape essentially became is one that was technically proficient and emotionally inert, which is, again, deeply ironic for HR tech. So next slide. What this sort of brings us to is, what we term sort of the confidence problem. So, these brands speaking with an incredibly competent voice, but ultimately kind of thin on substance. And it's not about bad writing or, being unstructured. I think it's about making claims with a certain level of certainty that the content doesn't earn. And I mean that on like a human level, right? So I think readers, like they're good at detecting that mismatch, and we'll get into why shortly. But they feel it. And so I think trust is like, one of the most valuable things on both sides of business, as a customer, but also as an employee. And it goes quickly, and invisibly and kind of irreversibly. So, you look at how the confidence is, or how the content is sort of rated. 64% is high confidence in tone. So, which is fascinating for like such a human sector, right? Like this is about people, and like obviously people are, they contain multitudes, as they say. So this idea that we can be putting out content that is so certain and so high confidence about an area of business that is so ephemeral and so emotional is fascinating, and probably suggests that it's a bit overdone. And then 6% delivers genuinely high information gain. So they're maybe not talking about the things that are actually happening in HR tech that are revealing fascinating learnings about people, about how to manage them, about how to retain them, and all the things that we want HR tech products to do. But the content isn't reflecting that, which we found really interesting. Next slide.
Sure.
So, I mean, obviously the wind was already at our back with HR tech companies, hiring folks like us and creating a lot of this content. To be fair to us, we did some interesting stuff with Oyster in particular, for example, where we worked on, hiring guides, and we jumped into content that had an emotional tinge to it, right? So, for example, we did some work on maternity care, and we kind of mapped, what maternity care looked like around the world, and how companies could leverage HR tech platforms like Oyster to provide care for their sort of expectant mothers who are their employees, and that had an edge to it, right? It shouldn't. It should be baseline table stakes for companies, but the fact that we were enabling and educating their audience about this incredibly one of the most emotional things you could do as a human, and have a child, and that content resonated really well. So I think that's a good example of digging into kind of human-led narrative emotional content that kind of moves away from this trend here. AI has made this urgent, obviously. So, AI has removed a bit of the friction that existed in the past. The old bar was just, we'd look at competitor content and, just kind of optimize, and that would generally win. Now people are looking for content that is direct, personalized, because that's what they're getting from the LLMs, right? They're asking very specific questions and queries and prompts, and they're getting very specific personalized answers. And so that has changed, search behavior and buyer behavior. And so what that means is this efficiency-led content is it's immediately commoditized. AI is doing it, synthesizing it, as Tom mentioned earlier, and the game has changed. Next slide, please. AI cannot replicate, the content that carries a genuine human perspective. So, it's important for brands to have a point of view that someone has earned through, expertise or practice, or experience. There's got to be a story that only that brand can tell, or that brand can uniquely tell. There's got to be some sort of insight that came from living inside the problem, which AI cannot do, right? And not describing it from a safe distance. An example from one of our clients, they're a programmatic advertising agency, and we just did a case study for them. And we could have followed the typical. It was for a financial company in the States. We could have followed the typical problem, solution, and results framework, and we did that. But we told a story, and the story was about the account manager at our client, and the team member at their client, who they formed a bromance, if you will. And this was in the middle of the financial crisis. And we still told what our client did for their clients in that problem solution results framework. But it was about these two individuals and how they were calling each other late at night, and solving these problems, and rushing things out to publication, and talking with reporters in the middle of the financial crisis. And because there was a story there. And so, yes, this B2B thing happened, but there were these two individuals who became friends, and because of the work that they did together. So just putting it in that wrapper, that's something that AI cannot replicate, and it's frankly just more interesting way to get to the problem, solution, and results. Next slide, please. And this is for all the folks out there who are worried about AI taking their jobs. This is what we mean by human-centered. It's not soft. It's not content that's all about feelings over substance or rationality. It's kind of the opposite. As Tom mentioned earlier, it's original. It's saying something that your brand can uniquely say, or maybe something they can only your brand can say. It's evidence. It backs up its claims with real substance, and maybe even original first-person research, as was mentioned. It's brave. It takes it takes a position, has the editorial courage to take a position, and it can be narrative. We're driven by storytelling. AI isn't. They're driven by bullet points and M dashes, right? So if you tell a story, it'll get traction with humans. Next slide, please. So in our view, the best content, and these days we're just leaning heavily into brand. And I saw Tom called out 2 brands that are, peaking out over the rest. We just think it's important for brands to stand out, and they do that by publishing things that they can only say, or they can uniquely say. So if brand brings specificity and has got kind of an emotional signal, it tells the reader, hey, we've thought about this, and we've got skin in the game, and we're not just trying to dish you efficient functional content that we can just plug into the LLM. And that feeling is hard to manufacture, and it's virtually impossible to automate. And also we think it's the foundation of a trusting buying relationship, which is critical these days. People are sifting through AI slop, and I think are hungrier than ever for brands they can trust.
Cool. I might chime in there, because this is something we might even be there, but we were going to talk about this at some point. But that's probably as good a spot as any. You work a lot more closely with brands to kind of define this stuff, but I know that when we go in and we're kind of consulting or doing strategy work with people, probably usually they expect to come to us and we give them a whole load of optimizations, or kill update, and there's a part of it obviously, but a lot more it's like, how do you define your unique perspective? For brands that maybe don't have that, what have you seen work in terms of brands arriving at an original content IP or unique perspective? And does it need to just come from the top, or?
Yeah. So how do they get there if they don't have a great one? I mean, that's why, like in our sort of tagline, we talk about we help brands rediscover their purpose, and we put that in brackets, right? Because some of them have discovered it, some of them need to rediscover it. To your question. I think it's about going on a bit of a journey, and this is something we do. We brand, we rebrand, we help them dig into that, and there's almost always a there, and so finding that. So even if you work in kind of one of the most unsexy industries, there's a deeper purpose, and there's a way that you are likely serving people, because every business is serving its customers in some way, that you can build out of, and that is somewhat noble and interesting, and you can build a brand narrative out of. So for us, one of our clients is in programmatic advertising, very technical sector, very hard to make that, very, very sexy, I'd argue. But we built this, avatar of this sort of like Dora the Explorer type character who is a navigator. And we talked about, being programmatic navigators. So in the sea of all these different tools and algorithms and things you could use, trade desks, all this stuff, our client is a company that is your navigator and helps you, and then literally we have her and like she has like her hat and she's got the like camping gear and she's on a boat. And people engage with that, they engage with avatars. So I think it's about like mining your brand values, mining your sort of legacy for like that goodness and that uniqueness, and just talking about it and not actually trying to be like, not trying to out optimize every other competitor in the same way that they're trying to out optimize you. And I think that's the key.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's something I think people always get struck with. They want to find like a purpose. I think purpose is a difficult word because if you're in, for us, we help brands optimize content for AI. We don't have a kind of higher purpose. There's not a we're not saving the world here. We're helping people make good content that makes them money.
and like I think people, it's such a misused word. I'm glad you mentioned it. Like I think I think when people hear purpose, they think it needs to be like some bombastic social purpose, like your Mother Teresa or something like that. And it's I don't think that's the case. Like I think most brands have a purpose. Some of them are heavier on the sort of social impact side, and some of them are pretty neutral, hopefully. But there's still like a purpose there, right? And I think like for you guys, I've worked with you guys, like you're elevating the sector. You're helping people think more about the effectiveness of their content. You're making marketers and folks in that space like smarter and more attuned to kind of meet the needs of their clients. And that's a fantastic purpose. Like I love that as an agency owner, and it really helps us. It helps marketers. You're elevating a profession. So don't sell yourself short.
No, but it's like it can be an opinion or a perspective. It's like we work with a point of sale provider. Again, it's not like there's nothing particularly sexy about payments and point of sale, but we were kind of talking to them and it's like, okay, what are your USPs? Like, well, you get the money really quickly. With the bank, you have to wait 24 hours. And so there's a purpose in there, which is like you shouldn't have to wait 24 hours for your money every time someone buys a coffee from you. And suddenly that opinion then can flow through all of your content, and that's the like unifying thing. And it means that then is something that humans are going to latch onto from every piece. And when AI is talking, if you take the AI example, when a buyer is then talking to ChatGPT and asking it, why do I have to, how do I get my money quicker? Guess who's going to come to mind? So it's like that it can be that simple.
Yeah, I'm really glad you mentioned payments, because that's an area that like I cut my teeth on the on the content strategy team at Wise back in the day, and we know that the journey that they went on. And we were writing about things like how to get your passport renewed in Singapore, or how to become a citizen in Mexico, and all under the cover of like payments and lower fees and like more money in your pocket as a digital nomad or as a freelancer. So your purpose isn't always your product. I think that's like where people get it wrong. I think it's the benefits that your product sort of ensues, and what your audience sort of feels and is able to access as a result of working with you, as being one of your customers. Similarly, we did some work with Chipper Cash as well, and they were democratizing payments across the African continent, right? So, we were able to give them, 2 writers who were uniquely their ICP. So, Naomi, who lives in Harare, Zimbabwe, who's, one of our former writers, and Ndoze, who lived in Calgary and was a diasporic Nigerian sending money home, right? So we were able to talk about like, people sending money home to family and the impact that had, and people who started businesses because they had, better access to payment infrastructure. So there's loads of purpose in payments, and it was super fun to kind of build that out with them.
Yeah, which is interesting because that might be the exact opposite of just getting ChatGPT to split out that same blog post. But it'd be really interesting to compare the two side by side and run them through some of the analysis that we've done, and I'm pretty sure you'd see a nice difference. Anyway, I'll let you carry on.
Yeah. Getting kind of closer to the end here, but yeah, just the practical implication. So, obviously we're not going to abandon functional content, but I think it's 97%. I think, we need to stop treating it as kind of the ceiling. So I think, because that figure is so high, it tells us that there's kind of a systematic underinvestment in content that builds long-term brand equity. So this is a classic thing in marketing. And so, you read books like, How Brands Grow by that bar and sharp. And, they advocate kind of the 60-40 split between activation on the 40% side and sort of brand building on the 60% side. And that's an argument, that's a debate within the community. But I think we fall on that side of, look, over the long term, building your brand equity and maybe writing about things and pushing things out that aren't immediately going to convert, but over the long haul, as you see with Wise, they're still cashing in on that piece that I wrote about renewing your passport in Singapore, right? So, but they're also, they're activating loads of people. So, thinking about it that way, I think is important. Getting the genuine AI citation, which you mentioned, Tom, because you're saying something that the machines, it can't synthesize, I think is key. And also, having content that actually kind of moves people, and like humans ultimately make buying decisions, because of how they react. It's not like a one-to-one thing there, but it is something that you can track and you can see. It's not like, oh, I read the blog, oh, I purchased the thing. It's a bit more diffuse than that, but you see it in the way that people react to content and they share it and they engage with it, and just sort of focusing on that, I think is the key, especially today with lots of AI content. So
cool.
Yeah.
And then I might just add one thing actually on that, which is something just for another study that we did, which is our dark AI. I won't go into the full details, but one thing we have noticed is that AI is accelerating the speed at which people move through the funnel. So you typically have this idea that brand building, top of funnel, is going to take a long time to pay off. Actually, not nearly as long. That increasingly is getting collapsed, because I'll take an example of I realized I needed a new email provider for some campaigns we wanted to run the other week. Typically, that would have taken me weeks because I'm going to go and speak to them. I'm going to do all the research myself. Instead, I talked to AI. It took me through that buying process over the course of one conversation. So the steps that I go through are no different because humans buy. That the way that I make a decision is not going to change just because of AI, but the speed at which I can go through it. So actually, and this is what gets us onto that, and we can maybe put the actual research in the follow-up. What influences the recommendation that I get at the end is not actually how well optimized a brand's content is in terms of that bottom of funnel query. It's did they help influence the top of funnel queries that set that conversation off in a direction that landed at that product, right? So did the top of funnel, if you think of typically, that's where that's what marketing is, right? We're trying to impact the market in such a way as changes what people want at a core, right? Nike is trying to sell you one thing that you want from shoes. Adidas is trying to tell you want another thing. That all now happens super quickly within AI. If you can set that off in a direction that influences you. So that's where this kind of top of funnel category influence is increasingly really important to getting bottom of funnel impact out of AI.
Totally agree. And I think, you look at the stuff that April Dunford has put together about, sort of category creation or sort of category resilience, and how difficult it is to like sort of create, a new category, how difficult it is to maintain, category leadership or achieve it if it's been achieved by someone else. But like, it's all about that availability of sort of mind space, right? So you're like 95% of the time you're going to hit people when they are not interested in buying what you have to sell. But if you remain sort of relevant in that mind space until that moment when they tip into the 5% who actually are ready to buy, then you're singing, you're winning. And so how do you do that? How do you get into that space and be an option for them when they are ready to buy? And yeah, that has a lot to do with like top of funnel sort of awareness. So
yeah, the one that we were going to kind of talk just openly about a few questions. We've done one. The other one that I want to talk about is, and get your perspective on, is how brands can actually create really differentiated content and basically act on all of the things that we're saying while still capturing the benefits of AI. One of the things I'm always conscious of is, if you're a marketer right now, you have kind of twin pressures. You've got LinkedIn, me, Paul, everyone telling you one thing, and then you've got your CEO telling you that content is a commodity and cut head count. Everyone is that's the kind of direction of travel, and you're caught in between those two things where there's now this huge pressure on volume and output. But you probably know intuitively a lot of the things that we're talking about. I've got some ideas. Have you seen brands do a really good job of that? I don't know if there's anything you're able to share on how you can capture that while keeping quality high.
Yeah, so your question is sort of how do you keep quality high, but kind of while also responding to like pressures in the market in terms of quantity and sort of headcount?
While still using AI. So how do you get the benefits of AI without just churning out bad content?
Yeah, I mean, I think you talked about it earlier. Like, use it for what it's good at in terms of parsing data, maybe even running some research itself, or empowering you to do so. Helping you with ideation, helping you with drafting. That obviously you eventually add a human touch to. Workflow. I think it's actually more about just like streamlining your workflows and agentic, oh, I had this meeting with a client. Okay, now turn that into, 5 or 10 ideas for, long form content or LinkedIn posts, things like that. Like that stuff, takes us time to do, because we're not as great as AI is at like sort of synthesizing massive amounts of data. So, use it for what it's good at. And I think we've seen that we can scale a content strategist, we can scale a writer, we can scale designers and devs now, because so much of that baseline work is done. In terms of specific brands, I probably struggle to have specific ones. I'd have to think about it. But I think in the B2B space, like looking at brand, like what's the one that comes to mind? There's one out of LA. I'm completely blanking the name, of course, because I'm on a live right now. But they really focus on taking interviews and prioritizing interviews with subject matter experts, and then turning that into sort of repurposed content in various formats. And I think that's a really strong use of AI, and it's just a really strong content strategy in general. It also aligns really well with this whole idea of subject matter expertise, and frankly, the human who's lived inside that question, that experience. And I think that's almost exclusively what they do. The name, I can see the brand, I can't get the name, but yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, it's pretty similar to our experience. So I can tell you what, I'll use us as an example, but also something that some clients that we've worked with have done. One of the first things that I always say when we start working with a client is get your market perspective written down as a document in markdown format, so that it can really easily feed every single AI. And straight away, you're going to be producing better content or better first drafts of content than 90-95% of the market. And that's, if you don't have that, and obviously, as a content marketer, you can't always go and put that together yourself. Go talk to your CMO and say that, that's not good enough. And that it's not a big thing to ask for. You're asking for a 2-page document which says why you exist.
And so much of it is like that's just hygiene, right? And like the degree to which a lot of brands struggle with that is actually pretty astounding, and frankly why a lot of agencies exist, because we're sort of tasked with like going in and extracting it from their team. And a lot of brands, like they sort of shoot themselves in the foot, and they hide the ball. They like they're our subject matter experts, like they don't really have time to talk to the marketing team. They're so busy sort of delivering the product. And it's like, okay, well, your content's going to struggle. We're not able to get that market perspective in there because we can't get access to the subject matter experts. So it's unfortunate, but it happens.
Yeah, and the other thing is, increasingly that information lives out there in a way that you can access anyway. So another good tip is go, like, even if you get granola for 2 months and say, okay, subject matter experts, you can't afford to spend time documenting what you know, but you can just pop this on your calls, and I will bet over the course of 2 months, everything that you need will come out of those calls. Whether it's sales calls, your founder doing talks, things like that. It will come, and you can do it yourself that way. It's slower, but it does work.
Yeah, and I think the call like intelligence piece is like one of the best ways that I've seen used to in terms of content strategy. Also, we work with a company called ResearchGoat, and they kind of deploy this tool that basically does audience research, market research, and it's basically just a conversational AI. It'll have the conversation with the audience member that you want to kind of interview and survey. You populate the questions, you determine who you want to interview. Obviously, you pay a little bit for that person to be sourced, but it'll go find the people that are your audience and do the interview for you, and then give you the raw transcript and the insights. I think it's a brilliant use of AI to kind of build a foundation for great content strategy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, we're at 5:45 UK, so I think it's time that we wrap up. I hope this has been helpful for people. We will send out an email now with the full report for everyone. It's all ungated, so go have a look. We can also, whether you're a brand that was part of the study or not, actually, we can kind of produce your own benchmarks of this and help you benchmark that against what we see across the market. So if that's something that you're interested in, then give us a shout. And Paul, I'll let you quickly just tell people how they can get in touch with you if they want some help on the content side of things, actually doing things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just Paul David at Little Humans on LinkedIn, or paul@littlehumans.com. Give us a shout. Yeah, I think it's a really, really interesting time. And I think the work that folks at Demand Genius are doing in terms of helping folks understand kind of the ROI of content is crucial. And that's where the market's moving. So thanks, y'all.
Cool. Well, thank you for doing this with us, Paul. And for those of you that are still with us, thank you for joining. And yeah, do get in touch if we can help. Cool. John, I don't know if we can stop. John's left. Cool.
Sweet. Oh, good. Thanks, man. Should I hop out? I'll talk to you soon. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll speak to you later.
Cool. See you later, man.
Yeah.